first one is James Currier from NFX. He's not only a co-founder and serial entrepreneur of NFX and a couple of his own startups, but also a real marketplace conference all-star. I think he joined us the first time in 2018, then 19 last year. So we are very happy to have him back. James led investments in the likes of Patreon, DoorDash, or Move. And we are super happy to have probably one of the biggest experts around marketplaces and network effects on stage now. James, good to see you. And I would already like to hand over to you and hope everyone can enjoy the session. And afterwards, we hopefully have time for a Q&A.
Okay, sounds good. So hello everyone, I'm James Currier, and today we're going to be talking about what we're calling disguised marketplaces. And essentially these are going to help you figure out how to solve the chicken or egg problem, and I'll give you lots of examples so that you can get your head wrapped around it. So, I'm with a firm called NFX, and we invest seed, sort of $1 to $3 million in the seed checks, and we've invested in over 80 marketplaces, and we really love them and make it a real study, and we actually publish a lot. And we've invested in companies you've heard of, including Incredible Health, which just announced their $1.65 billion round. And then if you want to go get more content from NFX, just go to nfx.com into the marketplaces area, and we've got it all listed out there. So what I want to talk about today that we've come to understand over the last 5 or 6 years is that in order to get to a marketplace, you often have this chicken or egg problem. And we've actually written an article about 19 different ways of jumping through that chicken or egg problem. But the other way of doing it is to disguise it. And so to get to a marketplace, sometimes you want to start as a SaaS workflow company. And that's your product, and that's what people think they're getting. Or you might start as a brokerage and a concierge. And that would then get you to a marketplace. Or you start as a payments company and then eventually move toward a marketplace. Or as a website components company and then eventually get to a marketplace. Or as a director in discovery. And I'll walk through examples of each of these with you. Now the question is why then would you add a marketplace if you already have an existing business that's doing one of these other things? Well, your base business might be going well, but what we've seen is that when you get a percentage of the transactions, when you get into that marketplace situation, it just makes your business accelerate a lot faster. It makes the business bigger. Furthermore, it makes it more durable. And we've got an actual article on NFX sort of giving you the numbers about how much that durability adds value to your overall market cap and the returns on the time that you spend building your company. And so having a durable business over time, you get a lot of the upside in the out years. And so durability, which is created by a network effect like a marketplace network effect, is incredibly important to your eventual outcome and how much money you make and put in your pocket. Now, there's a third reason, which is you might get a higher multiple. Right now, you would get a higher multiple. I mean, marketplace revenues are given higher multiples in the public markets than the SaaS revenues. Certainly more than brokerage and website component businesses. Of course, 18 months ago, that wasn't true. So it comes and goes. SaaS multiples were incredibly high 18 months ago or 12 months ago. They've come down enough now that marketplaces are indeed a higher multiple as they used to be, but that's not always going to be the case. So that's sort of a third reason that you might do it. Okay, so what are some examples of these SaaS for work for business? Well, famously, OpenTable was charging $199 per month per restaurant for the restaurant to use their workflow SaaS software. Now, after 6 years of doing this, they finally opened up the marketplace where you could then make a reservation through OpenTable, and OpenTable would then get a $1 transaction fee on that marketplace. But that took them 6 years to open up, and they really were a SaaS workflow business for the first 6 or 7 years of that company. And that's a pretty famous example. Another example you might not know as well is a company called TravelJoy, which is in our portfolio. They're working in the travel space. They are giving software to travel agents, and everyone thought, oh, the travel agents are going away. Well, because people can go on Expedia and do their own work. Well, it turns out they're not. They're actually coming back. There's more and more travel agents again. And they charge, TravelJoy charges $29 per month to a travel agent to use their software to organize and book and then pay for travel for their customers. But ultimately, TravelJoy is going to build out a big marketplace for travel, and is in the process of doing that now. They're starting to capture the transactions, and then they're going to go toward a discovery phase that will help create that marketplace. Another example would be a company called Wheelbase, which gives software to RV rental owners around the United States and Europe, and in Australia now. And if you are a mom and pop shop, and there's thousands of these, and you're managing 25 RVs, you're managing 250 RVs, you need software to help you run your shop, the scheduling and insurance and contract signing and making sure it's clean, that sort of thing. And so Wheelbase comes along and charges $99 per month to one of these mom and pop shops. But really, they are using that as a way of getting inventory to put that onto their marketplace called Outdoorsy, which you might have heard of. And that's another unicorn company, about $1.5–2 billion market cap on the last round valuation. Another example would be a Honeybook, who also charges $29 per month to the professional who is using their software to run their business. And in the end, Honeybook is building in payments and discovery into their platform, and they've recently had a $2.5 or $2.4 billion market cap investment, Series D, I believe, and doing incredibly well. But they started out and they continue to charge $29. Now, OpenTable no longer charges a fee, and Wheelbase no longer charges a fee. Both of those SaaS softwares eventually, after many years, have become free, but TravelJoy and Honeybook continue to charge in order to make sure that their supply side actually uses the software. And so these are four good examples, and there's many, many more of companies that have started as SaaS workflow businesses and then are building a marketplace on top of that. Another way to go is that we've seen is to start as a brokerage or a concierge. And an example that you might have heard of is Flexport. This is a company that makes a brokerage between people who want to ship goods from China to the US in ships on the ocean, and then people who have the ships. And that has been done traditionally through fax and through phone. And Flexport came along and added more software, but really at the beginning was using fax and phone and email to do it with lots of people. And they grew very quickly because they gave better service, because they gave a few software components, but then over time have built in more and more software so that they're really giving both sides of the marketplace a unique experience in the same way that an Uber would do, and are getting more and more market share. Their last round was at about $8 billion valuation. They are becoming more and more a marketplace, but it's still a process of evolution. Okay. Another company that you might have heard of recently is Incredible Health. These guys are making a marketplace between hospitals and nurses. So the supply is the nurses and the demand is the hospitals. And they started out essentially just being a brokerage, saying, you need a nurse that you can't find, we will go find her or him for you. They did it with people. They did it by talking and advertising and getting people to apply. And then over time built more and more software, and now eventually bring SaaS software to the hospitals saying, why don't we help you with all of your hiring needs? And in the case that you can't find a nurse, then you buy it through our marketplace. And then Incredible Health makes $7,000 for that placement. So that transaction in that marketplace nets them $7,000 net in revenue. And so Incredible Health has recently raised around at about $1.65 billion. So they're doing very well, having started with this brokerage model. Another company you might not have heard of is a smaller company called Octo. They are in the used asset business. So if you're a large company like General Motors, you buy a lot of assets, you don't always use them. And about 20% of what you buy goes unused. So what do you do with it? You have to dispose of it. You either put it in the trash, you either redeploy it in your company, or you sell it. And Octo has started out as a brokerage, helping those companies find buyers for their assets. And there's people involved, and phone calls and emails and texts and that sort of thing. But increasingly, it's more and more software. And now they have a SaaS product that they're giving to these large corporations that manage all of their asset management and disposition. And about 65% of the disposition goes through the Octo marketplace and then gets sold to buyers who are then on the other side. And so that is something that started as a brokerage. In fact, the founder had run for 10 years a brokerage when he realized that it needed to move to software, it needed to move to a marketplace, and that is in the process of transitioning. Move.co is another company out of Phoenix, actually. Octo's in San Francisco, Incredible Health is in San Francisco. Move.co is in Phoenix, and they are in the used manufacturing equipment marketplace business, but again, have started as a brokerage and increasingly are bringing more and more software into it. And they've recently raised a big round from Tiger and are doing very well in that transition. And they're focused right now on the integrated circuit industry. So you think, well, how much used manufacturing equipment is there? Well, there's a lot. And in fact, even in a sector like the integrated circuit manufacturing area, where the United States and Europe are in the process of reshoring those sorts of manufacturing facilities because of the tension with Taiwan and with China, there's actually a very big market in just that vertical. And so there's a lot of opportunity in various B2B marketplaces like this. So that's a good way of thinking about making a transition to a marketplace. But if you start in a marketplace in any of these areas, it's very difficult to get going without the brokerage component, without the concierge component. And so those processes, those people, that culture inside your company need to be in place in order to on-ramp the traffic, both sides of the marketplace, to bootstrap both sides to get past that chicken or egg problem. So if you were to try to enter any of these markets purely as a marketplace, my guess is it would not go well. So these guys have hacked it in this way. The third area that I mentioned was payments. And you've got a company like Patreon who said, hey, advertise on YouTube, come to our website where we're basically just a payments company where people can pay you a monthly recurring fee. That's a special feature that we have on our website. And, hundreds of thousands of artists have done that over the years, over the last 10 years. And Patreon's recently had a $4 billion valuation. I'm not sure if that's what they're really worth these days now that the market has changed, but it's a great business. They take 10% of whatever gets put through the system, and they've made a real business of it. So, but they started out just saying, look, we're a payments gateway where it automatically renews that payment every month. $1, $5, $10. That was the feature that allowed them to get into business, and now they're an important part of the creator economy, if not the first sort of creator economy company out there. Another company that you probably haven't heard of is a smaller company called Cherry, and they're doing payments for the nursing home space. So when you want to take care of older people, you go to the nursing homes in the United States, and they have to buy napkins, and they have to buy plates, and they have to pay a lot of things to run their business, to take care of people. And Cherry helps them do that. But because they're so focused on this vertical industry, it allows them to then build up a marketplace between the nursing homes and all the vendors that sell to nursing homes. And there's lots of specialty products that are for that industry. And it's going to move into a discovery phase after it goes through its payments phase. So a very smart business. Another company like Candex, which you haven't heard of yet, but you will. This is a Fortune 500 payments company that allows the Fortune 500 companies to buy what the long tail payments. Okay, so 80% of checks that, let's say, General Electric will write or a Sanofi will write go to vendors that they're paying under $150,000. And it's just a big hassle to track that. They really just want to be spending it with larger vendors from an accounting perspective, a compliance perspective, a tax perspective, international payments perspective. Very complicated to have these hundreds of thousands of checks going out of these Fortune 500 companies. Candex allows them to just pay Candex, and then Candex sends it out. And this is a payments gateway, essentially. But over time, they are logging all of the vendors, these small vendors that these large corporations use. And over time, this becomes a marketplace. But again, starting as payments. And so we've seen that pattern quite a bit. This should say 4, it says 5. But there are there are companies like the Hotels Network, which have started as website component businesses. This is a company in Barcelona doing incredibly well. And they build website components for independent hotels, helping increase the transaction percentage of visitors to those hotels' websites. It allows those websites to compete with Booking.com using their own websites, because then they don't have to pay Booking.com 20 or 40% of their gross revenue. And so if they can drive traffic to their websites and convert it at a higher rate using the Hotels Network website components, then they're better off. Okay, so this is how the Hotels Network has gotten into business. And over time, they are going to build a network. They're going to build a marketplace between the buyers of hotels and the hotels themselves. That's why it's called the Hotels Network. It's a network of people who go to these smaller boutique hotels. And again, company doing very well, profitable, growing very quickly, and all started out as website components, and increasingly going to be generating revenue in the same way that a Booking.com does, which is by creating this marketplace between buyers and sellers in the hotel space. And of course, the full extent of that would be a company like Shopify, where they're giving you website components, your whole website or components thereof. And because of you being part of that, they are now getting your transaction revenue, right? They make most of their money through ShopPay, which is their transaction system. And increasingly, they're going to be cross-marketing between all the people who are selling on their Shopify website components. So that's an example of the full extent of this approach. Now, the real fifth group is what we call the directory or the discovery. And examples that you might know over the Angel List, right? So they said, hey, if you're a startup and you want to raise money, come list yourself here. And then the investors will come and peruse and decide if they want to invest in you. So it was really a directory and discovery mechanism. But then they said, but now you can do the transaction here. And then eventually they said, if you're an investor, you can actually run your whole business here, where you bring in money and then invest into these. So they've increasingly moved toward the transaction and toward more of the marketplace component. And actually they've dropped mostly the directory and the discovery, but that's where they started. That was their hack. That was their way to break the chicken or egg. And I think, again, their most recent valuation was around $4 billion. And it's really become a pretty good investing marketplace, mostly on back-end components. But everyone goes there and uses that. So that's pretty good. Another example of this would be a house. These guys started, 14 years ago. And so it's a different time for you now, but SEO on Google is much harder to hack than it was back in 2008, but that's how House got going. They allowed people to put up pictures and imagery, and that people would then use that as a directory to think through, how do I want to design my home? And they would discover new ideas, new ways of doing molding, new ways of doing kitchen cabinets, whatever. And from that, House is now building software that allows architects, contractors, and people who are selling things into these homes to be found and to make transactions. So they're actually getting in the middle of the transaction between the service providers and the homeowners who have been browsing and discovering on the house.com website. So that's another example of how they're moving. It's taking them a long time to move over to that marketplace, because it wasn't really in their mind. They actually moved to e-commerce first. That was what they thought they would move to in terms of transactions, but that turns out to be too low margin and too competitive. Whereas actually creating a marketplace around services is probably going to be more profitable for them. And then a more modern example, one that I've just heard of recently that I thought was a great example, is a company in Washington, D.C. in the United States, At Hotel. And these guys have basically tried to go after Booking.com by distributing their content throughout Instagram and TikTok and every place else. And this is a much more modern approach to creating a marketplace. And now people find, if you want to go to Iceland, you type in Iceland on Instagram, and the first thing that comes up is an At Hotel entity. And then while you're there, you can then book your hotels and your travel to Iceland right there through the At Hotel system. And so it's a distributed way of creating of grabbing demand to create a marketplace with the supply. And I think it's a new and good example of a modern way to do it when you're not just doing Google SEO like House did. And so that's kind of hopeful for the next generation of startups, and I think they're doing quite well, and monetizing that marketplace today. So, we've seen that there's at least 5 ways of disguising your marketplace, and you might, and there's lots of ways of approaching it. But one thing we've also noticed is that you might start out as a brokerage, and then you're going to need to bring in SaaS workflow before you can get to the marketplace. Or you're going to start as a brokerage, and then you're going to want to add payments on your way to becoming a marketplace. Or all these components can be combined. So remember, your business in your market at this time is going to be its own work of art. And that work of art is going to be painted with its own colors in their own balance. Okay. And think of each of these as a color that you can paint with. It's not a hard and fast thing like a real piece of metal component. It's actually more like colors on a canvas when you're painting the beautiful art that is your company. And by combining them in the right balance at this time, or in the right phase, or in the right order, you will end up attacking your market. So you can think through, what's the order in which I want to do each of these components? How do I want to combine them on my way toward building a marketplace business? Okay, so they're all different combined. Now, speaking of how you disguise a marketplace in order to break the chicken or egg problem, it's also the case that often these marketplaces are a way to disguise the fintech business that is ultimately at the end of your business, particularly in B2B. What we've seen is that by adding loans and factoring, adding insurance, credit cards, payment, these sorts of fintech type businesses, you can actually build an even bigger business than just a marketplace. So combining all of these different colors, fintech, marketplace, brokerage, website components, you end up building the biggest company you can with the most network effects, so that you're the most durable business and get the highest valuation at the out dates. So realize that we are disguising our marketplace, and our marketplace might be disguising our fintech business in the end. All right, that ultimately the core of your business might be fintech. We've seen this repeatedly. A good example of this, a really great illustrative example, is Outdoorsy. So these guys came to us years ago as a marketplace, and they'd been at it for about 1.5 years, and it wasn't quite working, right? So what happened was we suggested that they go back and work on their SaaS workflow, which they did. In fact, it was confusing enough to their customers that they actually created a new brand called Wheelbase Pro. And Wheelbase was, again, sold as workflow software to these thousands of mom and pops who are managing 25 to 300 RVs in their lot. And this helps them run their business. And that worked out very well. And that supply was then brought onto the Outdoorsy marketplace via this workflow SaaS software. And once they had that supply, once they had that SaaS software installed and working, they could then go back to the marketplace, which they left as Outdoorsy, as the name Outdoorsy. And initially, Wheelbase was their biggest business, and then Outdoorsy became their biggest business. And while they were doing that, they realized that the fintech components of the business were very important, to the point where they've recently announced that they've launched a company called Roamly. And they've moved into that sort of fintech insurance area. And they're running all 3 businesses simultaneously. And they've kept the names. So this is a great illustrative example showing you, just with the names being different for the different parts and components of the overall business, this is still one entity, and they're growing them all together. And so this is a great way to see the skeleton, to see the actual workings of how something like this would work, how you need, in order to get into your marketplace business, you have to disguise it as a software business because that's what the supply wants at the time. And then once you have enough of a marketplace, then you don't want to be offloading that insurance to some other company and giving them all the margins. So then you bring that internal like AWS did. I mean, if you look at Amazon, their AWS is responsible for so much profit on such a consistent basis throughout the year for Amazon. It really changes the trajectory of that company. And hopefully the same thing will be true for Roamly and Outdoorsy, and this combination will be stronger. That's a good example for you to perhaps follow over time. So that's what I have to talk about in terms of pushing information at you. Now we can go into some Q&A, and we invest in businesses with network effects, and you can get more content at the marketplaces component on nfx.com. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, James. This was really insightful, and also, again, we really appreciate that you joined us so early. I think now it's roughly 8 a.m. in San Francisco, Palo Alto, so it's a really early bird. One question, maybe we talked briefly about it, B2B marketplaces. Many people say it's the decade of B2B marketplaces. We've seen a lot in e-commerce and B2C marketplaces. And especially for B2B marketplaces, cracking or solving chicken egg problem is related to trust, right? And that's probably referring to the brokerage go-to-market. So what's your advice to B2B marketplace founders? How should they balance the focus on cracking those relationships, being on site, and actually already getting people onto the platform? So when they start out, right, many transactions are off platform just to build the relationships. What's your advice how they should balance it, when they should get the people on platform, and how to start out?
Yeah, so our experience has been, we recently did the first Harvard Business School case study on B2B marketplaces. It was actually a case study on Move.co and our decision to invest in the company or not, and how we were looking at that overall space. So yes, B2B marketplaces are coming. Even Harvard Business School is starting to do cases on them. It's certainly the decade of B2B marketplaces, particularly in places like Latin America, where the markets are inefficient enough so that there's a huge opportunity to leapfrog where we are in Europe and the United States, where things are already much more efficient, with all the brokerages and the faxes and the phones that are already in place. So our experience has been that you want to grow revenue as quickly as possible. And so we are happy to have companies do as much brokerage as the market will stand, as long as the margins are reasonable, and as long as they feel that they are somehow getting in a position to start embedding software into those relationships, at least in the next couple of years. Now, we don't always know what features each node in the network wants. And, sometimes in these B2B marketplaces, you have to consider the competitor, the brokers, the small brokers, the medium-sized brokers, as nodes in your network. And you can build software for them to basically, if you can onboard them, they will onboard, the customers. A good example of that would be Honor in the United States, doing home elderly care provision of labor. They, in the end, built software for the mom and pops, the brokers that were in each city. They tried various ways to create the marketplace between the customers, which are basically old people and their 40-year-old children who are making the decision about how to get care into the home for them, and then all the nurses. They originally tried to pull the nurses out of those local mom and pop sort of brokerages, and then that didn't work. And so now they're just partnering with them. And so understanding within every B2B market who the nodes are and what their needs are, or what's going to make them move, and then what's the software for them, what's the features for them. And that's literally just lots of conversations. And sometimes it's about seeing what software they are paying people to build custom for them. Because remember, there's there's tens of thousands of these small SaaS companies that are out there that started off as custom builds for individuals. And by looking at what they did, 15 years ago, and they're still using that crappy DOS software, you can actually sometimes see which features it is that the different nodes are actually looking for. And then you just do it modern, you just do it SaaS, you do nice, easy, good onboarding with a better name, and maybe paying them a little upfront so that they feel like they're getting cash now to onboard them. And we've seen all those things be effective.
Amazing, thank you. I mean, you're probably also referring to slowly eating into the processes at the old B2B players and kind of locking yourself in, right? When you're able to kind of help them with billing or invoicing, and just to have this in a system which is not an Excel file but digital, this is already 10x better than the status quo.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just giving them a little app where they press a button to order a truck to come pick something up, and they're like, "This is amazing!" And then suddenly they're using your software, and it goes from that first feature to the next features. But it just takes a lot of experimentation.
No, definitely. And maybe if we're at that point, it's, I think in B2B marketplace especially, also a lot about talking the language of the customer, right? Or the client or the party, in terms of giving them things they recognize, not inventing your own language, and just giving them the tools which they're used to. Do you have any best practice where you say, okay, these marketplaces cracked the communication aspect, saying, for example, integrated chat functions, or just 10xing the communication on the platform itself? Or do you think this is something which still often happens on the side? So the question is more towards, how do I get my user to spend most of the time on my platform in the most efficient way?
Yeah, it's a good question. And look, I mean, your point about watching their language and mimicking their language cannot be overemphasized. Okay, that it's so important to watch language. You can't force your way of thinking and your language onto people, particularly in the B2B space. And being a student of their language and really listening hard is a skill that most founders don't have, and it's one of the most valuable skills to have. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's the language hunt is sometimes what we call it, and sometimes people don't realize that they need to be on a language hunt. They just think, oh, I'll just do what we saw on the consumer side. We'll just bring it to the B2B side, and everybody will be happy. It's just not true.
Exactly. It doesn't need to be fancy. They need to be able to recognize it, right? And feel at home.
That's right. That's right. So that's the first thing. And I guess the second thing just to mention is that, yeah, everyone stays in email and in messaging, and taking them out onto your software is very difficult. And we have found more success by keeping people in email, keeping people on WhatsApp where they already are, keeping people on text, and then just developing software in behind the scenes to help streamline that. So we go from one employee being able to handle 10 customers to one employee being able to handle 45 customers or 50 or 100, and getting sort of human efficiencies. And that's where we are in 2022. And in 2028, we'll be in a different spot. But right now, that's where we've seen success.
Amazing. Maybe then two more questions, more towards you as at NFX and your investment kind of process. So the first question would be, what are the 5 key characteristics, besides the obvious a stellar team and a large enough market, which would get you excited about the marketplace? And the second one is, you're investing a lot in the US. Are you also investing in Europe, or what's kind of the geo focus of NFX? Maybe I missed that earlier, but if we could clarify that.
Yeah, we do invest in Europe. We invest in US, Europe, Israel, and Latin.
Okay.
We don't do MENA, we don't do India, we don't do China. We've missed out on those incredible markets. We just don't have the personnel for it. We're focused on these 4 regions. Gigi is in Israel. Pete is often in France or in England. He's British, although he's an American citizen as well now, and has a home here in San Francisco. But he's there quite often. We have our offsites in Europe. So yeah, we're in Europe quite a bit. In terms of what we're looking for, it's often the case that the founders really need to know their market. So in the case of Move.co, they had been brokers for 10 years. In the case of Octo, he had been a broker for 10 years. In the case of Incredible Health, she had been a doctor and her whole family were doctors. So there's an expertise in a particular vertical that helps dramatically to find the language, to find the features that are going to resonate with people. And we've noticed that that's pretty consistent across the winning companies that we've been working with. Another thing I would say is that we have to see our way toward how software is going to be used. If we think it's going to stay forever on email, then it's hard to really believe that this is going to be big, because until you bring in the efficiency and the lock-in of software, you're just going to end up competing as a brokerage, and you're going to get a brokerage type of multiple in the end. And so we do at least have to see a straight line toward where software will be used, or that software is already starting to be used at the very beginning, even if it's just one feature. That's another thing. And then look, with the case with Move, where they're just doing integrated circuit used manufacturing equipment, it sounds like a niche thing. We don't need to see a giant TAM always. Okay. Because we know that once you get it working in one vertical, that it bleeds very quickly into other verticals. Once you get the white hot center functioning, even in a small TAM type of a market, it can bleed. And so we're not as concerned about this massive, like, steel is such a giant industry. But it's incredibly low margin, and it requires factoring to even get the transaction to go, which means that it becomes an asset heavy type of B2B marketplace. And so we haven't actually done a steel marketplace yet because of that. Or, we haven't done one of these sort of local restaurant, like where people are cooking food in their home and then selling it in the neighborhood. The hyper local, heterogeneous needs, like the math is really against that business ever really working well. We haven't done one of those there either, but we could if someone has a good twist on it. We just haven't seen that twist.
Amazing, thank you. Maybe for one of the last questions, if I might quote you, because I figured this out in one of the last talks you gave. It's about interrupting the network of your industry. You basically said that there's this mentality: if it's not broken, don't fix it. Industry players talk with each other, and they want to hear from each other that everyone is doing it the same way, right? So could you give us maybe your best recommendation how to actually interrupt these networks and how to get into it and kind of break this mutual reinforcement in those most often traditional industries?
Yeah. So there's lots of ways. One is to find transactions that aren't happening and make them happen. Okay. So a lot of people say, oh, the industry is a $10 billion industry, we're going to replace it with software. That can work, but often what works better is it's a $0 billion market, but if we add software, we could make it a $1 billion market. And then we could make it a $3 billion market, and then we could make it a $10 billion market. And so interrupting is often finding transactions that aren't happening and inventing them using your software. Another way of interrupting is to make sure that the up-and-comer who wants to compete with the top guys can actually compete. And again, that's either through they weren't in business before and now they are, or they're kind of the lower portion of the market. And so they're like, screw it, I'll do it a new way because I'm only 30 and I'm not going to do it the way the 65-year-olds do it. I'm going to do it my own way. And this is going to even get me into business. So once they start using it, if it really is a superior approach, like an Uber is or a Flexport is, it's just a superior way of doing it, then the others will have to come along eventually, and they'll drag and kick and scream, and they might try to get legislation against you. Hopefully none of you are doing the U.S. healthcare market, where all this legislation has been built in to protect the existing incumbents, and so it's a mess. But they will try to fight you in various ways, but they can't really stop the young guns who are coming in to do it a different way. And so that can help interrupt. And then the other way to interrupt is just to get their trust, build it in such a way so that they can really grow their business, and that they are going to protect their brand, they are going to protect their employees. That's more rare. It's more difficult to do that for them, particularly the incumbents. Generally, you're trying to disrupt the incumbents, but I've seen it done a few times where they've co-opted the trusted members, the trusted sort of high power law members of that market, And then the others have come along because they saw the big guys doing it, felt comfortable.
Amazing. That's super insightful. I also remember, I think you said at one point in time that build those friendships, go to the dinners, go to the weddings, and kind of become friends with your clients. And that's exactly mirroring what you just said. It's not about only understanding the language, but kind of building the trust layer. And that's probably a very good way to wrap it up. Unless you still wanna add something.
No, that's it, and that's why we go back and we find that the most successful founders really know their markets for 10 years.
Amazing, cool.
Language. They understand how to move.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining us, James. This already brings us to the end of this session. I see there are no more questions in the chat for now. I think you displayed earlier your email address shortly. Can founders also reach out on LinkedIn to you, or what's the best way to kind of get
the best way is email. LinkedIn, I don't respond. It's chaos in there. Just James at NFX .com is the way to get to me.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah. And if a founder can't figure that out, well then.
Okay, understood. Cool. Thank you so much. Greetings into the US, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. It's still early. And I hope to see you again next year.
Well, thank you so much, and say hi to Pete Flint for me.
I will.